All right, folks, let me break down what's happening with the Chargers' new head coach situation. Jim Harbaugh's got some interesting stuff going on right now. He's ready to dive into offseason planning with Joe Hortiz, the general manager, but there's a slight delay coming up, and this may not be good for the Chargers if things do not go well. Let me break it down. What's up, buddies? Welcome back. If you are new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We cover all AFC West news here on this channel. So here's the news. Coach Jim Harbaugh actually needs to take care of a couple of medical things first. During his wrap-up press conference on Wednesday, Harbaugh revealed he's going to get two procedures done. First up is an ablation. That's basically a treatment to fix his heart rhythm issues. Then he's also getting his hip replaced. Now, both of these procedures are happening pretty soon, and honestly, it's smart timing. Better to get this stuff taken care of now before things really start ramping up with the team. In the NFL, timing is everything when it comes to coaching transitions. Taking care of health issues early in the offseason is actually pretty common among coaches, because once the season prep starts, there's just no stopping that train. Speaking of that heart situation, let me tell you exactly what went down during that Broncos game back in October in Week 5. It was pretty serious stuff, folks. During that first half in Denver, the Chargers ended up winning that one 23-16, by the way. Harbaugh started having some heart rhythm problems. You might remember seeing this if you were watching the game. Harbaugh had to step away in the first quarter, first to the medical tent on the sideline, and then he actually had to head back to the locker room. The medical staff didn't take any chances. They ran an EKG to check his heart, monitored his pulse, and had to give him some IV fluids and magnesium to get things under control. Listen, what's interesting about that Denver game situation is that Harbaugh actually made it back to the sideline once the EKG showed his heart was back to normal. That's just the kind of toughness you expect from a former NFL quarterback turned coach. This isn't Harbaugh's first rodeo with cardiac ablation. It'll actually be his third time. He had his first one back in '99 when he was still slinging passes in the NFL. Then another one in 2012. For those who don't know what an ablation is, basically the doctors either freeze or burn tiny parts of the heart tissue. These little scars they create actually help stop the heart from going into that irregular rhythm. It's pretty amazing how far medical science has come in treating these conditions. Yeah, if you were watching those late season games, you couldn't miss that noticeable limp Harbaugh was dealing with. It was especially obvious when he'd make that walk between the sideline and the locker room. Hip problems can be brutal, and it was clearly giving him some serious trouble out there. You know what's impressive, though? Even with these health issues, Harbaugh managed to make quite an impact in his first season back in the NFL. I mean, this is a guy who came straight from leading Michigan to that college national championship, and he didn't miss a beat. Look at what he did with the Chargers. Got them a 6-win improvement from the previous season. That's a significant turnaround in the NFL. Look, getting ready for next season, Harbaugh and Hortiz have got their work cut out for them over these next 6 months before training camp kicks off. Building a roster in the NFL is no small task, and these guys know it's go time. Speaking of which, let's talk about that playoff game in Houston. Yeah, that 32-12 loss to the Texans in the wildcard round wasn't pretty. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But here's what's interesting. Harbaugh hasn't backed down one bit from praising his squad. And when you look at the big picture, he's got a point. This team finished 11-7, and in the NFL, that's nothing to sneeze at. You've got to remember, getting to the playoffs is tough enough in this league. Sure, the way it ended wasn't what they wanted, but Harbaugh's seeing the bigger picture here. He's looking at the overall progress, the way this team developed over the season. From where I'm sitting as an analyst, that's exactly the kind of positive but realistic mindset you want in a head coach. Simply, credit to Harbaugh here for how he handled that playoff loss. You know what he said? He straight up acknowledged that while he believed his team could hang with anybody in the playoffs, and they could, they just weren't the better team that day in Houston. That's the kind of honest assessment you want to hear. And look at how he took responsibility. That's my responsibility. That's leadership right there, folks. Now let's talk about Justin Herbert's performance in that game because, man, it was rough. I mean, we're talking about one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league, probably having his toughest day as a pro. 4 interceptions? That's not the Herbert we're used to seeing. Completing just 14 passes out of 32 attempts? That's a 43.2% completion rate. For a guy like Herbert, who's usually as accurate as they come, that's way below his standard. And check this out. In 81 starts, including playoffs, Herbert's never had numbers this low. A Negavan Egez-Keelant-tized passer rating? That's his career low. But here's the thing about the NFL. Even the best quarterbacks have these kinds of games. It's how they bounce back that matters. And with a coach like Harbaugh now at the helm, you've got to think they'll be working hard to make sure this was just a one-time thing. Let me tell you something about how Harbaugh handled this Herbert situation. It's pretty telling. Instead of throwing his quarterback under the bus, which some coaches might do, he stepped up and took the blame. We did him a disservice and didn't put him in a position to be successful. That's exactly what you want to hear from your head coach. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Hortiz brought up some really good points about playoff struggles for young quarterbacks. He mentioned Peyton Manning and Lamar Jackson, 2 perfect examples. Let's put this in perspective. Manning, who we all know became one of the greatest ever, lost his first 3 playoff games. Jackson, who's been tearing up the league, also started 0-2 in the playoffs, and now Herbert's 0-2 in postseason games. You know what this tells us? Even the elite quarterbacks face these early playoff hurdles. It's part of the learning curve in this league. The playoffs are a different animal, folks. The pressure's different, the game plans are more detailed, and every single mistake gets magnified. But history shows us that these early struggles don't define a quarterback's career. And with a quarterback-savvy coach like Harbaugh now in the picture, Herbert's got the right kind of support system to figure this playoff thing out. You know what I love about what Ortiz said here? He's absolutely right. Trying to write off a quarterback based on just 2 playoff games is, in his words, absurd. This is exactly the kind of level-headed thinking you need in an NFL front office. He's not letting these quick, hot takes cloud the bigger picture when it comes to Herbert. Now, let's shift gears and talk about something really crucial for this offseason, the salary cap situation. The Chargers are actually in better shape cap-wise compared to last year, which is good news. But here's where it gets tricky. They've got quite a few important decisions to make. We're talking about 9 guys who were either starters or key contributors who were on one-year deals. Let me break down some of the big names they need to make decisions on. J.K. Dobbins in the backfield, Christian Fulton at corner, and Denzel Perryman at linebacker. These aren't just depth players we're talking about. These are guys who made real impacts. In the NFL, managing your cap space is like putting together a puzzle, and Harbaugh and Ortiz are going to have their hands full figuring out who stays and who goes. The fact they've got more cap space is huge, but in this league, that money can disappear really quickly when you start trying to keep your core players together. This is going to be one of those offseason where every decision matters. Here's the thing about the Chargers offseason. They've got some major decisions coming up with key players. Khalil Mack hitting free agency? That's a big deal. We're talking about a guy who can still be a game wrecker when he's on. And then you've got Rashawn Slater moving into that 5th-year option of his rookie contract. He's been absolutely solid protecting Herbert's blind side. I really like what Ortiz said about their approach to improvement. He's spot on when he talks about not getting tunnel vision in just one area. In today's NFL, you can't just focus on fixing one thing and ignore everything else. It's got to be a complete organizational effort to get better across the board. Now, about that coaching staff, Harbaugh's saying he doesn't expect any big changes, but here's something to keep an eye on. Jesse Minter, their defensive coordinator. Word around the league is that he might be getting some looks for head coaching positions, and honestly, that's not surprising. When you're a part of a successful staff, other teams are going to come knocking. That's just how it works in this league. The way the coaching carousel spins in the NFL, you've got to be ready for anything. While Harbaugh might want to keep his staff intact, we all know how quickly things can change when those head coaching opportunities start opening up. You know what's really significant here when we talk about Greg Roman potentially coming back? This would be huge for Justin Herbert's development. Let me tell you why. In his first 5 years in the league, Herbert's basically been playing offensive coordinator roulette. Having the same coordinator for 2 straight seasons, that would only be the 2nd time in his career. That's pretty wild when you think about it. In the NFL, continuity is massive, especially for quarterbacks. When you're constantly learning new systems, new terminology, new schemes, it's like having to learn a new language every single year. Having Roman back would mean Herbert can build on what he already knows instead of starting from scratch again. He can focus on perfecting the offense rather than just trying to learn it. I've seen this pattern throughout the league. Quarterbacks typically make their biggest jumps when they get that consistency in the coaching staff. When you look at the most successful quarterbacks in NFL history, most of them had stable coaching situations early in their careers. So this potential return of Roman, that could be exactly what Herbert needs heading into year 6. And that's where we stand with the Chargers heading into this crucial offseason. Harbaugh's taking care of his health, Herbert's got a chance at some real offensive continuity, and the front office has some big decisions to make with that cap space. But here's what I want to know from you all in the comments. If you were in Ortiz's shoes, which would you prioritize first? Bringing back Khalil Mack for that pass rush, or using that cap space to add some new weapons for Herbert? Your team building philosophy might be different from mine, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.